Hello, Awesome Soul here, and we have some more Robocraft Infinity news. If you'll remember back a little ways, I talked about an image that was tweeted out by one of the Robocraft accounts, and this showed off a screenshot of the game with a few people saying that they were testing it out with members of the Xbox team. Well, it would appear that we now have video of this, and they actually give a fair amount of interesting information on the game, as well as one thing that is going to come to Robocraft in general, so both versions of the game, and that would be confirmation on a brand new part coming to the game. Although it's not entirely brand new, but I'll get to that once I cover it, because I'm going to be covering this in the way that I normally do my live streams, and that is by giving out the time codes throughout the video, because the actual source video is rather long. It's about half an hour. Link to that, as always, can be found in the description below. Without further ado, we actually jump into this right away at the 20-second mark. Yes, very fast we get some good information here. They say that it is coming out in Q1 of 2018. So if you don't know what that means, basically all you need to know is they're aiming for somewhere between the first 3 months of 2018. They're not entirely sure when, but it's just within that window. You can expect the game to come out. At the 1 minute mark, this is a direct quote of kind of how they describe the game. And they say it is a redo of what we currently have on Steam, etc., with a fresh new look and approach. It is pay up front, so a lot of the mechanics have changed, mainly around how you pay for items and how you get items. He continues, and a lot of things we've encountered over the years of development, this is the time to fix those things, and have a fresh, brand new audience who's never experienced it before. That is a rather interesting description of it, but I do want to reconfirm that originally in their initial press release for this, they said that the two versions are going to exist side by side, and they're going to keep developing for each of them. Hopefully that will still remain the case, because near the end of the video, they talk about the old Robocraft, and they kind of use the word legacy to describe it, so I'm a little unsure about that. I guess you can watch it for yourself though, and try and interpret what they mean from their mouth instead of mine. Anyways, as far as building goes, they state at the 7 minute and 11 second mark that you actually use the triggers to build. So presumably one would be to place a block, and the other one would be to delete the block. Of course, while you're actually looking at it. Because Robocraft Infinity will be keeping the old building method, so that first-person view is going to be staying completely intact. In case you've missed some of my other videos on the topic, at the 10 minute and 50 second mark, they say that there are going to be some minor visual tweaks. The one that obviously stands out, and the example they used, was the blue bay, as opposed to the orange bay that we have now. And going back to a point I made earlier, at the 11 minute mark, they give the reason as to why it's called Infinity. Now I'm sure some of you already knew this, but like I said, some people might not know this. And that is because when you unlock a part in Robocraft Infinity, you will have an infinite amount of that part. So, say for example, you unlock the rail decimator. You now have literally an unlimited amount of that part to use. You unlock the ion, you can place bazillions and zillions and trillions of ions on the ground. And of course, as follows, they're going to be changing a few things as to how you acquire items. It seems like crates are not going to be a thing in Robocraft Infinity. People have speculated that it's going to act somewhat similar to how the old tech tree worked. Although they kind of gave a mixed message, because at some points in the video they did talk about once you get an item from a crate, you will have unlimited items of that variety. Although it could just be a slip of the tongue when they were talking about crates. Who knows, they still have a little ways to go as far as development goes. So I guess we'll just have to stay tuned and see what happens. Now, this bit is actually coming to not only Robocraft Infinity, but also the regular Robocraft, because this is a brand new part. Now, this is not 100% confirmed. However, this is not the first time we've heard about this, because previously they've talked about wanting to add new Tesla shapes, but that's really the only information we got. However, they specifically say in the video that they're wanting to add Tesla lances. So instead of the wide shape, we get a long, narrow shape. The example they gave was having a lance in one arm and a shield in the other, so you can make a robot knight, for example. That is going to be really, really awesome, because the way I foresee it is just simply mounting it on the side of your bot and having it fairly concealed, but it's really long. So if you sort of side swipe the enemy, if you're in a car, for example, you can side swipe them and it will shear off a whole bunch of blocks. But it's not going to have that big, wide target from the skies. So it's going to be a lot more protected that way. At least that's kind of what I assume. We don't really have any more information on it other than the fact that they're thinking about adding a Tesla lance. But on the topic of other Tesla shapes, are there any more you can think of besides a lance? I can't exactly think of too many. At least ones that kind of make sense aesthetically, if you kind of get my drift. Anyways, moving on from there, we do have confirmation that at the 21-minute mark, the CRF, the Community Robot Factory, will indeed be making a triumphant return to Robocraft Infinity. It will be carrying over, but presumably, because the classic version and Infinity do not communicate gameplay-wise, it would make sense that they would not communicate with the CRF. Those would be separate, at least I would assume so. We don't have confirmation on that, although it would be pretty cool, because from the information I've gathered over the months we've known about Robocraft Infinity, it would seem that the building system is going to be exactly the same. However, if the CRFs do communicate, a problem I could foresee is update schedules. Will we be able to update the game for the classic version and Infinity at the same time, or are there going to be delays between the two? Hopefully not, because again, they've made it a point that a lot of the features of Robocraft Classic will be directly carried over to Robocraft Infinity, mainly the parts, etc. So yeah, carrying on, at the 23-minute mark and 48 seconds, they say that the Xbox friends list and achievements will be coming to the game. But not only that, I believe a little earlier they state that voice communications will be fairly important, at least in the context of teamwork, although that could be referring to what we currently have now with clans, because they kind of were talking about Robocraft Classic at the time they brought that up. Although it would make sense, because, correct me if I'm wrong, Xbox actually does have a built-in voice communication system, though I'm not sure if that carries over to the Windows 10 store. Since the two can communicate, the Xbox and Windows 10 version, will there be a problem there? I would have to look into that a bit more. Unfortunately, I don't have that information with me. But yes, in-game voice communication is something players have wanted for quite a long time, because we've had third-party support, but never anything actually free jam developed. So if we do get that, that would be pretty cool. Next up, talking about other things that sort of carry over into Robocraft Infinity, it would seem that at the 23-minute mark, 5v5 is going to remain the dominant focus of the game. So Deathmatch and Battle Arena will remain 5v5 even on Infinity. A few minutes later, at the 26-minute point, they say that 4K graphics are coming to the game. Obviously, 4K graphics being the big focus of their new-ish console, or version of the console rather, the Xbox One X. 28 minutes in, and we get something that I find to be rather humorous. And that is the developer describing the PSK to the guests, or the Proto-Seeker. So basically, while they're using it, and showing it off while actually trying to damage an enemy, the description they give for it is by laughing a little bit and saying, "This is a really underwhelming weapon." And yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. However, they go on from there to say that it is basically a noob weapon. For those players who haven't really played too many first-person shooters and kind of need a weapon that has a whole lot of auto assist to it. So I guess that little additional description is kind of why Free Jam seems to think the PSK is in, quote, a good spot, as stated in the last live stream they did. A minute or so later, they actually show off the Ghost module, and at first I thought they were honestly zooming in, because the bot is completely gone when using this module. So there's no shimmer, it's completely invisible. Now, is that a feature in Robocraft Infinity, or is it just simply an oversight? Honestly, any kind of buff to the Ghost module is a good one, because at least in my eyes, the Ghost module is kind of one of the worst modules. Even while you're invisible, if somebody's paying attention to where your general direction was, they can still clearly make out your bot. Plus, it's now the only module that still uses power, so hopefully it will get a much needed buff. Or make it like the other module and just make it not use any power. Another quote I picked up was, "When we've made some of the design changes, there will be some things that are currently viable in the PC version, aka the classic version of Robocraft, that will not be viable in this version." Which also kind of got me thinking, since Robocraft Infinity is going to be cross-platform, wouldn't that mean that the players on Windows 10 with the mouse and keyboard setup would have the far greater advantage over the other players on console? Because to give a good example here, for Overwatch, all of the console versions actually have a different set of balancing procedures over the original PC version, simply because using a controller is far less accurate than using a mouse and keyboard. I'm sure that's something that's going to be addressed, or at least have to be addressed at some point, because why would you ever use the console version if you have a far greater advantage by using the Windows 10 version? Anyway, last two things before we close up here. This is by far not the last you've heard of the game. There will be more news before it drops in the first quarter of 2018. And also, if you do actually watch the footage for yourself, you will notice that there are the old version of the wheels and not the brand new version of the wheels. Somebody brings this up on Twitter, and Rick, the art jammer, actually responds by saying that there will indeed be the new versions of the wheels in Robocraft Infinity before it launches. So presumably every part is going to be exactly the same before the launch of Robocraft Infinity. Anyways, hopefully you have enjoyed this entirely, or I guess almost entirely, Robocraft Infinity focused episode. Let me know what you think of Robocraft Infinity. Will you be actually picking it up, and for which system? Or will you just be sticking around on Robocraft Classic? Anyways guys, I will go ahead and end the video here. I of course have been the Awesome Soul. I thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care.